We are here with the Nikon DF. This is a full-frame camera from Nikon introduced earlier this year. The camera is a full-frame camera with a twist. As you can see, the design, at least in the front and in the top, is a retro design. So it's different than any other digital camera from Nikon so far. Now, this camera has some of the qualities of the best Nikon full-frame camera, the D4, at least until recently, and some features from lower-end Nikon full-frame cameras like the D610. In this review, we're going to take a look at some of these features. We're going to take a look at the design and the controls of the camera, and we're going to talk a bit about the image quality. So let's start. Now let's look at some of the features of the Nikon DF. From the D4, the DF takes the image sensor, a 16 megapixel full-frame image sensor with very high ISO capabilities, which is one of the strongest features of this camera, and we will talk about image quality in a second. From the Nikon D610, it takes the autofocus system, as well as the shutter mechanism, which goes from 30 seconds up to 1 to 4,000, and not 1 to 8,000 like the D800 and the D4, which is a bit of a problem, especially if you're shooting in very bright sunlight and a few other situations where very fast shutter speed is important. Now, in terms of other qualities, we have a very large viewfinder, which you can see in here. It's a 100% coverage viewfinder. It's very nice. One of the things that we have found, which is a bit lacking in the viewfinder, maybe we'll talk about this a bit later, is the fact that you can't actually see the menus from any angle. So you have to be completely straight and leveled with your eye to the viewfinder. So this is one thing that we have found that has to do with the viewfinder. Now, in terms of other things that have to do with this camera doesn't have video at all. So this is the first digital camera from Nikon which doesn't have video capabilities, at least in the last few years. The idea was to bring a camera which is pure photography or pure stills, basically. This is the logic behind what Nikon has done. We're not sure why they actually chose this. It would have been nice to have the video capabilities of the D610, for example, but it doesn't have, so keep that in mind when thinking about this camera. Other features that you can find on this camera, you have manual controls through and through, and a lot of controls which you can configure manually. So in this respect, it's closer to the higher end models than to the lower end full-frame cameras. So let's move and start talking about the controls and the design of the camera. Now let's talk a bit about the design and the controls of the Nikon DF. As you can see, the front of the camera as well as the top of the camera are all very retro looking. The most interesting thing is that the back of the camera, as you can see here, is much more conventional. It looks like any other Nikon full-frame camera, more or less. Another thing which is retro looking is the lens. This is the kit lens that comes with this camera. Obviously, there are kit lens and body only sold by Nikon, but this is a 50mm 1.8 lens which was specifically designed aesthetically to match the Nikon DF. As you can see, it has this metal ring. It doesn't do anything, it's just for aesthetics, but it comes with a camera and it looks pretty nice on the camera. This combination looks pretty cool if you like retro design. So let's talk about the controls. On the front you have one dial here. This is the dial to control the shutter. You have two buttons here which you can configure. One of them is a PV and one of them is a function button. On this side you have the autofocus and manual focus button. Here is the button to release the lens. We also have a screen shutter release socket right here, bracketing button here, and this is more or less everything that you have on the front of the camera. Now this dial here is actually not very comfortable to use. It's not in the right place, at least not to our hands, but it's also pretty hard to turn. As you can see, it's not very easy compared to the conventional dial that you have on the back. It's definitely not the solution that we would pick. So this is one thing that we have to say about the dials of the camera. One good thing that we have to say is the place for these small attachments for the strap. In a lot of Nikon cameras from recent years, these things are on the side, and the fact that these things are on the side makes it much harder for the camera to be set on its side. For example, if you don't have a tripod and you want to set the camera vertically, to shoot vertically on a flat surface, this actually disturbs your ability to do so. But in here, these things are in the front, so it actually doesn't disturb your ability to put the camera on the side vertically. So this is a nice touch. Let's look at the back of the camera, or maybe before that, let's look on the side. Here we have three places for connections. We have the first one is for USB, the second one for HDMI, and the third one is for a remote, for connecting a remote control. On the other side we don't have anything, and this is because both the battery, which you can see here but I can show you, is here on the bottom, as well as the only here it is, the only SD card slot. It doesn't have two slots for SD card or CF, just one, which is actually a bit of a nuisance, because we already had a chance to shoot with it quite a lot, and at least in one occasion one of our cards malfunctioned and we didn't have a backup. So keep that in mind, just one card, in this case SD card, and it lies here. It doesn't, the place for the SD card it's not on the side like in a lot of other cameras, but in this case it's on the bottom. But at least with this tripod we didn't have any problem removing it, as you can see. So let's look at the rear of the camera. Here we have the menu, the white balance and the lock. We have the image quality and the magnification. Here we have the info. On this side we have another info button. There are two different info buttons. We have the live view, and we have the ability to lock the focus point, and of course the joystick. Here we have different, you can see here, we turn on the camera and the live view, we have different metering modes. So this is when the camera is on. Let's turn this off. We have the rear dial, the autofocus on, and the AEL and the AFL locks. Here we have the delete and the play button. So these are all the things that you have on the back. As we said before, the viewfinder is very large, it's very convenient to use. The only problem is that you have to be straight down to view it straight down. If you're on this angle, or a bit from the side, you risk actually not seeing the information that is displayed below the image or above the image on the viewfinder, and this is a bit of a problem. So this is something to keep in mind, but otherwise the viewfinder is very large and very good and convenient to use. Now let's look at the top of the camera, which is probably the most interesting in terms of what Nikon has done in the bottom wise, if you're looking for the retro design of this camera. Let's start from the right. Here we have a tiny bottom that turns the light on for this very, very small screen that we have here. It's nice that Nikon added this screen, but it's actually very cramped, and there is not a lot of information on this screen that you can see. You have the battery, you have the number of images, you have the f-stop, and you have the shutter, the shutter information, and that's about it. You don't have a lot of other information. So this is what you have on this tiny screen. Now this is the mode dial. As you can see, you have M, A, S, and P. That's about it. Now we struggled quite a bit to realize how to turn it, but eventually we figure out that you need to pull this and then change it. It took us a few minutes to actually realize this, and this may come from older Nikon designs. We didn't have any experience with them, and we even gave this camera to a few people who shot with analog cameras from Nikon, and it took them a bit of time to actually realize this. So maybe they're already accustomed to shooting with digital cameras. They don't have this trick, but it's good for not changing this accidentally, but otherwise it's a bit annoying, at least in our experience. Here we have the on and off button. As you can see, this is off, this is on. This is, again, not very comfortable to use. From some reason, Nikon didn't provide the small switch on the front of this button, and the fact is that you need to actually grab this and change it like this, instead of just move it if you have something like this, which is much easier. So this is another thing that we would change if we had the opportunity. Here we have the shutter dial. This is actually a double dial. The upper is a shutter dial with all the numbers, like older cameras, like manual cameras. You have all the shutter numbers starting from 4 seconds and up to 1 to 4,000. You have a third stop set, which you can change via the rear dial. You have X, T, and bulb, so you can basically change it and use it as you like. The bottom dial below this shutter dial actually controls all sorts of situations, or all sorts of options for the camera. This is a single mode, continuous low and continuous high, quiet, timer, and mop, which is the last one. Now, in terms of the design of this dial, it's actually very convenient to use, and we would really like Nikon to add it to other cameras as well. It's much more convenient than their regular design for this dial, for example, on our Nikon D7100. So let's move to the other side. Here we have the ISO, the sensitivity dial, and exposure compensation dial on top of it. So these are the two dials. The exposure compensation is simple to use. Just press this button and change it. The ISO is slightly more complex. You have to push this button, which is not very conveniently located, but otherwise you can change it to whatever you want when you're using manual, when you're using the camera in manual mode. So these are all the dials on the top of the camera. Some of them very nice and comfortable to use, some of them less so. So this is the Nikon DF in terms of both controls and in terms of design. Now let's talk a bit about the image quality of the Nikon DF. Now, as we've mentioned, the sensor on this camera is the same as the Nikon DF. So the image quality, especially in terms of high ISO capabilities is very, very good. We have tested this camera up to ISO 16400, and the images were very, very clean. In 3200, the image is very, very useful. 6400, well, it depends on how you look at it and on the specific situation, the lighting and everything else. But it's definitely far superior than our D7100, which is the best or one of the best APS-C cameras currently on the market. Now, what we didn't like, or at least we'd like less in this camera, is the autofocusing system. Now, it has two issues. First, the coverage of the frame is quite small. As you can expect, it's the same thing as the D610, but this camera costs significantly more than the D610. So we would have liked to see the autofocusing system of the D800 and the D4 on this camera rather than the lower 39-point autofocusing system of the D610. Now, another thing is that in low light situation, the autofocus is not as good as in other, brighter situations. So this is another issue with the autofocusing system of this camera. You can use it. We have used it in low light. It's not such a big deal. But if you already own a D800 or a D4, well, moving to this is not the best of things. So you can now see on the screen a few of the images that we have shot with this camera. We took a lot of images in all sorts of situations, both in low light and regular street photography, if you like. We have to say that the 50mm 1.8 lens that comes with this camera has severe issues when focusing in low light. So it also depends on what lens you use. This is true for any camera basically, but this lens specifically is really not intended for fast changing autofocus in low light situations. We've shot dancing at night and find it very hard to focus on moving subject. We had a very high rate of misses when we used it. So keep that in mind and use maybe other lenses. We used a 105mm macro lens, which is also great for portraits, and it performs much better. So it really depends on the lens, but the camera itself, the autofocusing mechanism itself, is not the top of the line for a Nikon. So this is what we have to say in terms of image quality, autofocus system, and general performance as a whole. The shooting speed is quite fast. The reaction time of the camera is quite fast. So in these respects, the camera really performs as we have expected it to. So let's sum things up. What we have here? Well, we have a retro-looking camera. If you like this sort of things, then this is definitely something that you will appreciate. We have superb image quality, even in very low light situations, up to ISO 3200, even at 6400 in some situations. This camera really excels. Another few things which are nice. Well, there are a few controls on the camera which we find useful. For example, the lower dial on the top below the shutter dial, and of course people who are used to manual dials might be more accustomed to using this specific unique dials that Nikon provided on this camera. Not all of them are very intuitive, at least to us, but again, it depends on where you're coming from. Another good thing that we have to say about this camera is the ability to actually really configure the camera to your needs. There are a lot of controls or buttons which you can assign for whatever you want to do with the camera. We assigned this button, for example, to use for the ISO. It was very comfortable to use, and there are a lot of other buttons which you can also assign. So this is another good thing. The viewfinder is also very good, apart from the issue that we have found regarding the fact that you need to be straight or leveled and look directly through the viewfinder and not from the side or top of the or slightly from the bottom, where you lose a bit of the information that is above and below the image. So these are all nice things. You also have here the screen shutter release connector, which you don't have in all cameras these days. Now, in terms of things that we didn't really like, well, you know, the autofocusing system, as we have said, is not top of the line, despite the fact that this is a pretty expensive camera. So this is one thing. The shutter speed is 1 to 4,000 and not 1 to 8,000, which is a shame. Another thing which we find a bit discouraging is the fact that there is only a single SD card available for this camera and not a dual card. We mentioned this before. Also, some of the command dials, especially this one, are not very comfortable to use, the front command dial. Would definitely like to see a different command dial, more regular command dial like the back one. So this is another thing. We have mentioned that the retro design just works basically just on the front and on the top, but on the rear of the camera it's more or less a regular digital camera, so regular looking digital camera. So if this bothers you, take this into consideration. Another thing which is not unique to this camera, but is something that all Nikon cameras, at least as far as we know, have, is HDR, which only works on JPEGs. We're not sure why the HDR mode only works with JPEGs, and Nikon, by the way, doesn't mention that the problem is when you try and work with it when you're on RAW. When you're shooting RAW, it doesn't tell you that this is the problem, so you actually have to figure it out yourself or go to the manual and read about it. So this is something that we would like to see changed both in this camera and any other Nikon camera. And at the end of the day, we think that the basic problem with this camera is its price. It doesn't have anything to do with the camera itself. This camera costs about $3,000, and for what you get, well, it really depends. If you really like the retro-looking design and the image quality, which again is superb, by all means go and buy it. But for less money you can buy the D800, which will give you more megapixels, as we said, and video capabilities, which you don't get on this camera. But if you're into the retro design and the high image quality of this camera, by all means go for it. You can read more about it on lensvid.com.